Thank you, Manuel. And it brings me a little bit the latest question that you see there about the carbon markets. So maybe it's a good transition to go through this topic. So, thank you. Nice to see you. So indeed, this is the first time that we do these lightning talks, but basically this is about diving into a topic. And carbon market is one of those. It raised already a lot of interest between our sector itself, but there are also a policy dimension behind. And I think we welcome now this dimension through the Jurek Krakic, is the policy officer from the European Commission at Director General of Climate Action. So he's working in land economy, but also he has been following the carbon removal certification framework through the last 3 years and a half, almost, I will say. Also looking into the land sector emissions, the post-2030 climate framework, and also to better understand how robust monitoring, reporting, and verification methodologies could be looking into these carbon removals to make stronger the EU climate governance. So having all these 3 years and a half, I think is a lot of experience, and also through ERSC and our association, we have a lot of companies that have been following the process since the draft of the regulation, but until the next steps that has been looking into this methodology development, but now we are entering into the phase of implementation. So, and this brings me a little bit why we have Yuri here, because now we will go through this phase to jump into implementing that. And maybe the challenge is about how operators, and when say operators, maybe we look about the ecosystem, the big ecosystem that is about the landowners, the project developers, the certifiers, the verifiers, the auditors. So as you see, a new dimension from potential customers or that will be using MRV systems. So it is maybe also to better understand from the policy dimension. We know about the value chain there, but the policy dimension about the current status. And for that, maybe the question is now to you, where we stand today on this, and maybe about the methodologies process, and also maybe you could address us about where are the key developments that maybe our community could still support on this process. Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you, Monica. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thanks a lot for having me here today. Very happy to be here, and indeed very timely discussions as we are now moving into the implementation phase, as you rightly point out, of our CRCF regulation. CRCF stands for Carbon Removals and Carbon Farming Regulation. So it's a regulation that was adopted 2 years ago and is designed to provide new business opportunities to farmers and foresters who wish to engage in carbon farming activities, so in better management of soils and forests, in a way to sequester more carbon in our soils and more carbon in our biomass, so to create also more biomass for the future. In the last 2 years, a little bit maybe on the state of play, during the last 2 years we've been very busy developing the specific methodologies, specific certification methodologies for different activities, with the help of our expert group that included many stakeholders. And we are almost ready to go, so to speak, for the permanent removals. So for the industrial removals, the methodologies have already been adopted. On the carbon farming side, so carbon farming pertains to the land, and what we want to focus, I guess, today in this discussion. We have a methodology for rewetting of peatlands, afforestation, and agricultural soils and agroforestry. And these methodologies are almost ready to go. We still hope to have them adopted before the summer break. And then there are a few procedural steps that need to be taken, but it should enter into force in autumn still this year. Then we will also still this year hopefully adopt the methodology for carbon storage in buildings, which is a very important, if you look from the value chain perspective, it's a very important continuation perhaps of your products that you bring out of the forest. So you make space in your forest to create more removals, and you store the carbon in a long-lived product such as a building. And this methodology is also due still this year. So then we will essentially have everything in place to kickstart the certification process. Now, what I think is very important to mention today is that, so the methodologies set out a set of rules on how certification is carried out. We have a few groups of criteria, one of which is the quantification. It's a very important one because, of course, if you want to certify a certain amount of removals that have been created, it means that we need to know how much removals have been generated. And so it translates into rule for quantification or monitoring, however you want to call it. We call it quantification. Under quantification, so monitoring of emissions and removals in soils and in our biomass, in afforestation, rewetting of peatlands, agroforestry, and agricultural soils, we have developed a set of rules that allow quite a large spectrum of approaches, I would say. Of course, then we also need to manage the uncertainty levels, but this is not maybe the question for today. But what I want to say is that the methodologies allow for three different types of approaches, or a good combination of those, rather. You can resort to ground measurements, you could resort to remote sensing, earth observation, and to modeling. And of course, it makes a lot of sense to try and reduce the burden as much as possible of this quantification and to use advanced technologies as much as possible in a way to sort of streamline or simplify or maybe even semi-automatize this monitoring that needs to come every time you want to issue certified units under a certain project. So I think it makes a lot of sense to think about how we can really embrace advanced technologies, how we can embrace models, how we can embrace remote sensing to bring us the simplification or the reduced monitoring burden, so to speak, that they can offer.
Well, you mentioned about the monitoring, reporting, and verification, and maybe I can see that it has been maybe an evolution from the monitoring, and maybe now we need to work more in the reporting and verification about the contribution of EO into that dimension. I saw that we have a Slido question also that maybe we could go back to that. I see it projected there, but maybe it's related to that. How maybe Earth observation has been evolving since the last 3 years and a half in the discussions. Maybe before we could understand that it was useful for states establishing the baselines, maybe monitoring the land, but maybe now it's more in the discussions about improving the sampling strategies, supporting the quantification that you address. So how do you see this evolution of Earth observation in the thinking of the Commission and also the group of experts that you referred before? How this evolution of Earth observation from this monitoring part to the reporting and verification, how they could support in this dimension?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point. So what I would say is that, so legally speaking, so from the policy perspective, I think the methodologies keep quite an open door to the approach that specific certification schemes or specific operators, so farmers and foresters, wish to take on board. However, I think the guiding principle on how to really use the remote sensing Earth observation in the most efficient way should be to look into where we can reduce costs as much as possible, where we can reduce the time or the resources that any specific entity needs to spend on the quantification, because I think for the farmers and foresters, their primary objective is still to manage their land in the best ways possible, and we need to find ways to streamline or or even automatize this monitoring, MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification as much as possible. So. And this is also a little bit maybe a question from me to the community that is listening to us. Where is it that we can mostly or in a most efficient way reduce the costs, for example? Can we reduce the amount of ground samples that we need to take for soils, for biomass, for example? Is there a way to use remote sensing to calibrate models in a more efficient way? So what products can we use to really move from ground sampling to a monitoring that is as efficient as possible and that we use these remote sensing products in the most efficient way. And at the end of the day, when it comes to monitoring of emissions and removals in CRCF, but also in national greenhouse gas inventories and everywhere, we speak in tons of CO2. So we need to somehow we need to translate whatever remote sensing gives us, we need to translate into tons of CO2 at the end of the day, because this is also what the certified unit then certifies for.
So thinking in this, it's sequestration of CO2, and maybe this brings us to the market. No, we are in EXPANDEO. EXPANDEO is where the market meets. So maybe it's coming through this dimension from policy to market now, and also because the industry here is also what maybe they are looking for. I have seen through these last years that there's an exponential growth on rating agencies, for instance, and curiously they are very close to the market stock change. So we see that rating agencies are the ones that are rating really the project developers. So looking into that, having discussions with them, you mentioned maybe about uncertainty is not the topic, but certainly it's on the table. And also because uncertainty can still affect the project performance. And this is what the rating agencies are looking for when rating, no? So maybe you could explain more about what you think in the methodologies, if there is an uncertainty aspect to take into account, and how the methodologies will play around. I think they should not be static. How do you see the methodologies moving through the years?
Thanks a lot for the question. So, of course, uncertainty is important, and maybe I would also I would, to what you say about the rating agencies, I would also add that under CRCF so they are already in the Basic Act, so in the regulation adopted by 27 governments and the European Parliament, there are already rules on the governance, so how the whole system works in order to be reliable. And we have a combination of certification schemes and certification bodies. So these are essentially the ones that the remote sensing companies could talk to, because they will be the ones that will probably suggest to our farmers and foresters MRV approaches and monitoring approaches. On the uncertainty, of course, it's a very important metric. We take uncertainty levels in our carbon farming methodologies very seriously. So in the methodologies, there are rules on how one needs to estimate the uncertainty level. So whatever the quantification approach, there will also always be a certain amount of uncertainty, because no method is 100% certain, not even if you go out there and measure every tree by yourself. So there's always an uncertainty level, and we need to be able to manage that uncertainty. So there is a set of rules in the methodologies that govern how uncertainty levels are calculated or set. But then we do not, the methodologies themselves do not really restrict projects from participating, but if uncertainty levels are higher, it means that more units, more certified units need to be relinquished into a buffer pool. So it's not to say that we need a certain threshold of uncertainty, of certainty levels. I think it's very important to calculate that uncertainty and to manage it in a good way. And we manage it by setting aside a certain amount of certified units into the buffer pool. So whatever the risk an operator is willing to take, it just means that they will need to set aside more units into a buffer pool that they then subsequently cannot sell on the market.
Maybe this buffer pool brings me something that is related with another set of stakeholders that are the insurance or maybe banks that could finance this type of products or project developments. So do you already discuss in this expert group with this type of communities, or do you feel that EO community should approach to them to discuss how they could evolve and support in the market?
So within the expert group, we discussed more or less the entire framework of the certification methodology, so all the rules that need to be set out. Indeed, under the liability mechanisms, there are two ways to go. We call it a liability mechanism. There are two ways to go. One is to manage the risks through a buffer pool that a certification scheme must manage. And this pertains to the uncertainty level, like I just talked about. So a certain level of a certain amount of certified units from every issuance needs to be pooled in a buffer pool. That's one way to go. The second way to go is to see an insurance company and insure the project on the market, as for any other risks that we take in life. But that is really for the agencies to govern. It's bilateral agreements between the certifier and the insurance company. So this is where we don't really have the mandate of setting more rules. So the methodologies do allow for this avenue, and I think it's a very good way to go. But then it's really for the agencies, and then for the remote sensing companies, if they see, if they see a potential where they could help with that, to really talk to them and to maybe make that happen and make it more also attractive for carbon farming projects to go and seek that, to pursue that avenue of insurance.
So maybe just looking at for the time, but maybe you already have a kind of message to looking forward. No? So what is the recommendation from the Commission for this community to look forward to these potential carbon markets? Is that talk or still in the discussions with the expert group? There will be another expert group. What is maybe these new methodologies will be before the summer, as you said, implemented maybe through September. So what is our role now to follow?
So maybe we should just a little clarification. Perhaps we should yes. So there is a clear separation between the expert group. The expert group is there from the procedural perspective to help us develop the methodologies. And this work on carbon farming will now have been finalized, and then we move into the implementation phase. So we will then start also working on the next methodology for forest management. This is yet to come, and this is where the expert group, we don't have the exact timeline yet, but this is yet to come. And this is where the expert group, of course, will again come into play. On the other hand, we have the implementation. So where farmers and foresters will engage in certification, they will, when they do a good management practice, that they can engage in certification, and this is the implementation phase. And there, I think the Earth observation community should really come forward proactively with ideas on how Earth observation and how remote sensing, and I'm also mindful of the questions that are popping up on Slido. I think LiDAR is a great opportunity, but of course we need to come with a solution. So how we can use this LiDAR? I think it's really now for the Earth observation community to come forward to the certification schemes and try and find a way how to best embrace these opportunities. In particular, to reduce monitoring costs and to reduce the burden of acquiring, samples from the ground, in particular, for example.
So thank you, Yuri, because you addressed already the first question, and now for the second is about the buffer pool. You somehow addressed that, but is that about how buffer pool also create permanence behind the certified credits? Maybe you could complete that because you address it a little bit on this. Yeah,
so the buffer pool is there to respond to the risks. So when we're dealing with land, we are dealing with a sector that is a little bit specific because it's about natural processes. And there, in every project, there will be a tiny bit of risk of failure, of a natural disturbance or whatever. There are certain risks that are beyond our control simply. And so the buffer pool is there to ensure those risks for the time of the validity of the certified unit. So if you issue a certified unit and then something happens, something adverse happens to this project, then it will be the buffer pool that will kick in and replenish those units that had perished. So the buffer pool is there as an insurance mechanism, a liability mechanism, in case there is an event in a certain CRCF project that is beyond our control.
So I think we also have this Slido before maybe this 45 seconds, maybe we could project that. And then also comment, maybe, because I saw in before, I'm not sure if they have been changing, that the question was about, is the CRCF methodologies are successfully implemented at scale, where should Earth observation be prioritized? And I think we have a kind of winner, because it's in the, oh, no, sorry, it's another question. Yeah, so it is about the CRCF methodologies and how it is successfully implemented and how it should be prioritized. So all are equally important. So there, do you like to comment? Because we have baselines, we have monitoring the carbon farming, permanence. Do you like to comment on this?
Yes, I can maybe briefly, mindful of the time, I can briefly comment. So I think when it comes to CRCF units, we have the supply side and the demand side. I think on the supply side, we are doing a pretty good job with so it's been a very exciting 2-year journey when developing these certification methodologies. And I think we have something that we can all more or less agree upon across the EU. So we have something reliable to provide, to generate supply of these units. On the other hand, we need, of course, also demand for these units. And for this, we are, at the Commission, we are very active with the informal EU Buyers Club, where we are trying to gather, where we are trying to send out this signal to create demand for this unit. So we are working, so one is the CRCF methodologies, the other one is the EU Buyers Club, where we are trying to gather companies and interested parties to create also demand, so to set a signal that this is really now in the implementation phase and we need to get going to create more removals and more biomass for the future.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jurek. I think this is one of the ways that ERSC is also following the policies and also looking a little bit beyond into the markets. So we will follow the discussion about the new methodologies. And with that, I would like to ask for a round of applause to Jurek. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for having me.